Cable TV Advisory Task Force meeting of June 26th, 2006. We have Neil Ellis, Donna Gasek, Quincy Vale, and myself, Jeff Hull, here this evening, and we'll start with Donna Gasek.
Thank you, Jeff. I just wanted to present to the committee some information about my suggestions for the PEG Access Capital Grant section. I was just, in submitting this to the committee, I'm just asking for the committee to suggest, to consider changing the heading of the section that I believe you referred to as PEG Access Equipment Grant, and just referring to that section as PEG Access Capital Grant. I understand that in many communities, it's the capital grant is just the projected expenses for the facility and equipment combined, and not necessarily broken down into sections. Even though I have provided the committee with information about our projected equipment replacement plans for the next 10 years. What I have listed in this, on this page is information about our need to relocate our facility and what would be, what we anticipate as some possible scenarios for the expense of doing that. So depending on whether WCTV is able to find a building and renovate that building, or whether we will need to purchase property and actually build a new facility, we are going to be requesting some funding for that purpose. So basically in this one-page document, I outlined some of the research we've been doing to locate or identify a site where WCTV could potentially move, and the potential costs of the various options we're considering.
I guess my initial comment, and I don't necessarily have a problem with including a grant for facilities upgrade or replacement as part of the overall request. I think one of the things we should try to do is figure out how to translate any grant request and other funding requests into the impact on the rates in terms of the FRC. And I don't know if that's that equation or that calculus is something that Peter Epstein can assist us with, or certainly one other alternative is just taking, to the extent we can identify the information, the current costs for the license, which was the $194,000 for the institutional network installation of that, and then the previous grant, and based upon all of that, we've been fluctuating between 86 cents and I think at one time it was in the low 90s, 91 or 92 cents per subscriber, or per month per subscriber. So to the extent that we can do that, just so that whatever we ask for, we have some understanding as to what that will translate into in terms of a pass-through cost.
Well, basically, as I said, WCTV has been set aside funds for many years, partially for having some funds for emergency reserves and partially for anticipating having to relocate. However, real estate costs have risen dramatically. Building materials costs have all risen, so you know, we really have to take that into consideration in even though we do have some funds set aside, that there's a lot of potential additional costs here. And so we want to be able to not only move, we want to be able to both move to another location, a larger space, and be able to have the funds to upgrade and replace equipment as well. So that's all part of the capital grant request.
Okay, questions?
Not really a question so much as a comment. I mean, I think it's clear from the record at this point, from the hearings, and from a lot of the other materials we've seen, how well thought of the PEG access and programming is thought of by the town's residents, how much use these facilities get from the members of WCTV, and the fact that this is really a critical element of any license and ongoing plans for the future. I mean, regardless of whether it's, you know, one provider or multiple providers. So I think it's prudent to figure out how to come up with a budget that is sufficient to enable some meaningful relocation to a long-term facility that meets the present needs. This space barely meets the present needs. I mean, limps along and floods out, as well as anticipated future needs. So, you know, I don't know what sort of the right answer is, or how to come up with a number that works and is acceptable, and we'll eventually be able to negotiate and get. But I think it's critical that we include this as a key point of the negotiations.
As I've said in past meetings, we know that we've outgrown the space for many years, and we know that we need to replace and upgrade technology as we go along. The other part of the equation is, as I said, the relocation, and it's just continues to be a challenge to find the adequate site for us. And depending on what that is, you know, the budget will vary. If we have to buy property, I've listed some examples here of how much property costs now. Even if we're going to renovate a building, I have examples of what you know, it could possibly cost to renovate a space the size of what we're looking for. As I identified in the criteria list, we're looking for 4,500 to 5,000 square feet. So that's just a few examples here on this sheet of the potential costs.
In that 4,500 to 5,000 was identified 10 years ago, you know, in a similar process. So the need existed 10 years ago. It certainly it continues to exist. It's presumably even more critical now. And I guess one of the other things that may make the point more salient is to the extent that you're able to identify any costs that WCTV has incurred with respect to the ongoing flooding that happens here to any degree. I mean, it seems we've been able to control it relatively well more recently, but I know that has been an ongoing issue.
And our utilities have gone up dramatically with the installation of heating furnaces that we've had to use throughout the winter.
And they're going to go up more.
Yeah, that's right.
Electric rates are going to go up a lot in another year or so.
Really? Any idea of the percentage?
No.
I don't know if it's-
30-40%.
Now, I thought that just recently RMLD was going to see some advantage or some, discount may not be the appropriate word, but given the Cal situation there.
Yeah, what happened there, you know, I'm a member of the RMLD Oversight Board. What was in the press was one of the largest providers of electricity to RMLD went bankrupt, and RMLD had to cover that supply from Calpine. RMLD had negotiated, and there was an escrow agreement in place to hold RMLD essentially harmless in that event. So what the press was reporting was that that had all been resolved, and that the money from escrow had been transferred to RMLD. So in a sense, it's like the bankruptcy never really happened. The losses there have been covered, but that contract with Calpine is only good for another, a few months ago, it was only good for another 18 months. So I think at the end of next year, I forget the exact date, but at some point in the next year or so, RMLD has to go out to the market and replace with some variety of medium or long-term contracts the supply that it was getting from Calpine. And the market rates are probably 40 or 50% higher now than they were when the Calpine contract was entered into. So if RMLD currently has rates in place at 7 cents or something, this is for the generation portion of the bill, it's probably going to be 10 or 11 cents, somewhere in there, for generation, plus the delivery charges and other kinds of things. So you might be at 15 or 16 cents. That's my best guess right now. So that'd be an increase on the level and on par with what has been experienced by all the other utilities in the state or in the Northeast. And it just has to do with increasing fuel costs. So because RMLD put contracts in place, it's managed to delay and not have to sort of, at some point, the contracts expire and they have to go out and replace their supply, and it's just going to be at higher rates.
Any idea what percentage of the total supply Calpine represents?
Yeah, it was about 50% of yeah. That's why it was a big deal. So it was about 50% of RMLD's supply portfolio was from Calpine, and so.
That's quite a bit.
So yeah, that would just further exacerbate the problem here.
Right.
But there again, I think those kind of points at the appropriate time need to be noted, that this representation of a need for 4,500 to 5,000 square feet is not only a recent documentation, but was required 10 years ago, and to the extent the counter to that might be, well, you've gotten along for 10 years here, it can't be that bad. I think the point shouldn't be made that, yeah, you've gotten along out of necessity, but there have been costs in doing that, and here's some of those.
And inconvenience, sharing rooms for creating multi-purpose rooms where we're trying to do training in classes while someone's editing, therefore they can't necessarily get a project done efficiently because there's a lot of distractions around them, and there's a lot of other problems related to that.
It sounds like the town has its eye on this lot anyhow. Any idea on what the estimated time is on that when they plan to move ahead with whatever it is?
Well, Jeff would probably know better than I, but I know that, as I've mentioned here, there are some documents from the past that this was never intended. Okay, it's the second to the last paragraph.